Hi, I'm Glenn Rogers, and this is Biblical Insights. Today we're going to talk about life's priorities. And what I mean by that is that we're going to talk about the things that we think are the most important. And the things that are most important we tend to put way up on the top of our list of priorities. Now, the thing about priorities and the things we think are important is they tend to change as we age. If we're 60, our priorities are probably different than they were when we were 40. And if we're 40, then our priorities are probably different than they were when we were 20, and so forth. Priorities tend to change, at least some of them do. But here's the thing. When we really understand what's truly important, then those things get up on the top of the list and they stay there as priorities and they don't change. Some other priorities may change, but the things that we understand that are really, really important, they don't change. They stay as priorities. And the other stuff, some things get moved up the list, some things get moved down the list, and at some point we may realize excuse me, that some things don't belong on the list. They're not something that's really important, and they shouldn't be any kind of priority at all. Okay, so it's not always easy to figure out what our priorities in life ought to be, and then they start changing, and then that gets confusing. So in the New Testament, there's a passage from the Apostle Paul that talks about priorities, where he helps us understand what's really most important. And he talks about it from a very personal point of view. He talks about what used to be really important to him and what he thought mattered more than anything else. And then that he finally realized that, but those things aren't important after all, and they don't really matter. And so here's what really matters. And it's a very important text. It's one that you don't hear a lot, and I'm not sure why that is, but I want us to hear it this morning. I want to read this text from the book of Philippians, chapter 3, verses 4 through 11, and then think about what it means for our lives. And I'll be reading, as I usually do, if it's the New Testament text, from the Simplified New Testament Study Bible, which is my translation and commentary on the New Testament. So let's read this text and see what Paul has to say. If anyone thinks he is in a position to be saved because of who or what he is, I am in a better position. Few people can match my qualifications if that is the kind of thing they want to talk about. I was born an Israelite, circumcised on the 8th day, just as the law of Moses requires. I can trace my family back to the tribe of Benjamin. I am Jewish through and through. I am a Pharisee, raised and trained in the strictest traditions of our people. I was so intent on being godly and doing everything I thought God wanted me to do that I even tried to destroy the church that I thought rose up in opposition to him. If you want to talk about legalistic righteousness, there is none better than me. But all those things I used to think were so important, I now consider useless to be cast aside as I embrace Jesus. I could go even further and say that compared to knowing Jesus and having a relationship with him, everything else is rubbish. I have tossed it all aside so I can know him. I want a relationship with Jesus, not that is based upon my ability to obey laws and rules, but on faith in him. I want to be righteous, but I do not want to try to earn it myself. I want my righteousness to come from God because I have faith. I want a true relationship with Jesus. I want my salvation to depend on the power that brought Jesus back from the dead, not on my own power. I want to experience the same kind of suffering Jesus experienced, giving up my life just as he gave up his, so that in the end, I too will be raised back to life, just as he was. As I said, this is a very important text, and there's a lot of important things in there. Some of it can be hard to understand if you don't know much about Jewish culture. And so we'll talk about that just a little bit so that we really understand what the Apostle Paul was saying. And what he was saying is that early in his life, his, let's call it his pedigree, his ethnic and educational pedigree were the most important things to him. First, he was one of the chosen people of God. He was part of the people who could trace their ancestry all the way back to Abraham and the promises that God made to Abraham, and then to the Israelites and to the 12 tribes. And you know, he was one of those people. So that all by itself made him special. Then the family he was born in were very serious about observing the law of Moses, and so a boy baby, on the 8th day he was circumcised just like the law said he had to be circumcised, and that was a very, very important feature of the Old Covenant between God and the Israelites. He was trained as a Pharisee, a very strict sect of the Jewish people, and he followed the law to the fullest degree possible. And he says he did that so much, he was so concerned about doing everything that he was expected to do by God, that when the church came along and he thought the church was bad, he thought the church was in opposition to God because it was not following the strict law of Moses regulations, he tried to destroy the church. He was one of the leading proponents of destroying the church. And so he says, you want to talk about somebody who's got a pedigree, somebody who can say, look what I have done, look who I am, look at the accomplishments of my life. You know, he says, I'm right up there at the top. Very few people have done more than I've done and done it better. And so if that's kind of what you want to look at, if that's what you want to use as a measure for how righteous somebody is, then come on, we'll measure, you know. And you know, he was just a guy that thought all of those things were so very important. And then he had an encounter with Jesus. Then he met the risen Lord, and everything changed. You can read about that encounter with Jesus in Acts chapter 9. But that changed his life so much that he began to rethink what was really important. And what he learned as he continued his encounter with Jesus, and as he had a relationship with Jesus, as he was taught and trained by Jesus and appointed to be an apostle by Jesus, he came to understand that all of those things that he used to think were so important, you know, the family that he was born in, his ethnicity, his education, his zeal for righteousness and for obeying the law, all of those things that he used to think were so important and that would get him down the spiritual road and make God happy with him, he realized that ultimately those things weren't important at all. They were just, he came to realize, rubbish. Just rubbish. To be tossed out, get rid of them. Doesn't matter. It's not important. Don't need that stuff. Throw it away. It's just getting in the way. It's not worth anything. Doesn't do anything. It's just useless. Get rid of it. Well, then, if all of those things had been his priorities, and then suddenly they weren't important anymore and they just got tossed out, then what was important to him? Well, it was his relationship with Jesus. That's what was important. And the fact that when he came to God through faith in Jesus, his righteousness, which means being a right person, doing the right thing and being considered right with God. See, his righteousness didn't come from the things he did. He wasn't trying to earn his relationship with God. He wasn't trying to have God pat him on the head and say, good boy, you did good. You see, and that's what works salvation is all about. Somebody patting you on the head and saying, oh, you're such a good boy. You did everything I asked you to do. Well, See, that's not what salvation is about. That's not how you get salvation, right? And so we need to outgrow those ways of thinking. And so Paul outgrew them. And Paul understood that his relationship with Jesus and with God was based on faith. And if he was going to be considered a righteous person, it wasn't because he obeyed the law of Moses. It was because he had faith in Jesus. You see? And so it's one of those things that can be hard to understand at first. You need to really spend some time thinking about it and praying about it and ask God to help you understand it. But we have a lot of those same kind of things in our lives. We're kind of in the same spot Paul was in. You know, we have been told, you know, you're supposed to go to church and you're supposed to not do bad things and you're supposed to do good things, right? And as we were children, when we were growing up, you know, our parents would compliment us for doing good. You know, oh, you did your homework. Okay, that's excellent. Good job. And you ate all your vegetables. Okay, good job. Good, very good. Just good. You see, and we were complimented for the things we did. And when we told the truth, even when it got us in trouble, that was important. And we were commended for that. And when we did bad things, we had to be punished. But when we did good things, then we were rewarded. And so we learned a system, basically, that says you must do the right things in order to have the approval of the people who are above you, namely your parents. And so naturally you see how easy it is to transfer that kind of thinking, that kind of mentality into our relationship with God. And we tend to think, I need to be a good person. And when I am a good person, when I do enough good things, then God will like me and everything will be okay and I will get rewarded. See, and that's the way a lot of people think. But that's not the way Christianity works. Christianity does not work that way at all. Now, are you supposed to do good things? Well, sure. But do you get God's approval just because you did those good things? No. You get God's approval because you have faith in Jesus. Because the truth is, even when we're doing good things, we're also doing some bad things. We miss the mark all the time. I have another video about sin, what sin is. And it comes from the Greek word hamartia, means to miss the mark. And so it's if you shoot the arrow of your life, it's like an archer is the illustration that was used in the ancient times. An archer pulls back his bow and releases his arrow, and if his arrow hits exactly what he was aiming at, then he hit his mark, right? But if the arrow veered off and he missed the mark he was aiming at, then that was hamartia. Well, that's the word that is translated as sin in the New Testament. And as we shoot the arrows of our life, we miss the mark all the time. Every day we miss the mark. We are less than perfect. We are less than godlike. And so even when we're doing good things, we're also sinning. And we can't be good enough to earn God's favor. It comes to us through faith. Well, one of the things we have to do then is learn to lay aside the things which are not really important and focus on the things that are. What are some of the things in your life that you have always thought were pretty important and that you were kind of proud of? Okay, what were they? Was it the family that you were born into? You were very proud of who you were because of your family, right? Some people are, just because of the name their family carries, and their family in a town or in a city, or a lot of my listeners are in Africa, so in a village, right? Some people are from very important families, and some people are from not so important families. How does that factor in for you? Maybe it's your education. Maybe you went to school longer and got more education than most other people. Maybe it's the job you have. Maybe you're a very important person in a company or in a business of some sort. Maybe you're in politics. Maybe you're an elected official and you're very important. Maybe it's how much money you have. Maybe it's the nice house you live in, or the neighborhood you live in, the street you live on. Maybe it's the kind of cars you drive. Excuse me, having some issues with a cough today. I'm sorry. Maybe it's, the clothes you wear, the places you go to eat, the vacations you take. Maybe it's your spouse. Maybe it's your children that you're so very proud of. Okay, what are the things that are really important to you, and the things that you think matter most? But then ask yourself, whatever those things are, it doesn't matter what they are. They're different for every person. So you think about the things that matter most to you. How important are those things really when it comes to eternity? Life here is going to end. We're all going to die. And then we're going to cross over. We call it death. We're going to be transitioned into the next phase of life. And then what's going to happen there? Well, we learn from the Bible that what happens over there depends on what happens here. The things you focus on, the things that you have on your list of priorities as most important, and the things that you give the proper amount of attention to. What's most important for you? Paul came to understand that the most important thing was his relationship with God. The most important thing was that he had faith in Jesus. The most important thing is that he cultivated the relationship. He spent time in prayer. And because he loved God, because he had a relationship with God, he wanted to help other people with their relationship with God. And he didn't do that so that God would pat him on the head and say, "Oh, what a good boy you are, Paul." He did it because he loved God and he loved people. And he knew it was the right thing for him to do because of what was right and what was important. Not because he was trying to earn his salvation, but simply because it was the right thing to do and it needed to be done. He wanted to pattern his life after the life of Jesus, which was a life of sacrifice, a life of love and giving and concern, and ultimately of sacrifice. And Paul wanted to live that same kind of life. And he says he even wanted to die that same kind of death. Now, that's not something that God requires of all people who are going to be saved, that they die some horrible death somewhere, crucifixion, in some foreign place because of their faith in Christ. God doesn't require that of people. Paul just went the extra mile and said, I want to sacrifice myself the same way Jesus sacrificed himself. You can do that if you want. It's not required. But what is required is that you have faith in Jesus and that you understand all that other stuff is not really important. It's just rubbish. Doesn't count for anything. It counts as far as some people are concerned in this life. There are some jobs that if you want to have this job, you have to have a certain level of education, maybe a degree, so much experience. And so they count in that sense, maybe. But ultimately, in the bigger scope of things, what do they matter? Nothing. Because the person who comes to God in faith and has salvation has that salvation. And it doesn't matter how much education, how much money, what job, what kind of house, what kind of cars they drive. None of that other stuff matters. It's just not important. So we need to understand, as we think about life's priorities, whether we're 20 or 40 or 60, whether our priorities have changed, we need to understand there are some things which are really, really important, and they have to stay right up there at the top of the list. The other stuff belongs further down the list, and some of it probably doesn't even belong on the list at all. But it's your life and your list of priorities, and you're the one who has to go over them and analyze them and determine what's important and what isn't. Spend some time praying about it. Not just thinking about it, but praying about it. Ask God to help you set your priorities correctly and have what's really important up there on the very top of the priorities list. Well, those are my thoughts for today. I hope you find them helpful and encouraging. That's my intent in doing these videos. So I would leave you with this advice, same advice I always give. Read your Bible, pray, go to church, and may God bless.